Well, nowadays there's an increasing trend towards ecotourism holidays. So, what is ecotourism? Well, it's a form of tourism which should not only protect but also actively improve our environment and its cultures. However, many forms of tourism which are presented as sustainable, nature-based and environmentally friendly are often not what they seem, and this is rapidly becoming a somewhat thorny issue. Governments, as well as the tourism industry, promote ecotourism, but there are very well-founded concerns that in many instances it not only lacks adequate scientific foundations but is also not viable as a solution to the world's social and environmental problems, which of course is what ecotourism is supposed to be about. Many ecotourism holidays are really nothing more than a marketing ploy, and indeed, in the worst cases, can be said to even threaten local cultures, economies and natural resource bases. The issue is further confused by the multitude of terms to describe types of travel, which supposedly protect the environment. Other than ecotourism, we have adventure travel, sustainable tourism, responsible tourism, nature-based travel, green travel, and cultural tourism, to name just a few. So the problem we have here is whether a potential traveler who wants a legitimately environmentally friendly travel experience can make the right choice when confronted with this type of marketing. Today's lecture will center on prehistoric people of the Nevada desert. Now, most of these prehistoric desert people moved across the countryside throughout the year. You might think that they were wandering aimlessly, far from it. They actually followed a series of carefully planned moves. Where they moved depended on where food was available, places where plants were ripening or fish were spawning. Now, often when these people moved, they carried all their possessions on their backs, but if the journey was long, extra food and tools were sometimes stored in caves or beneath rocks. One of these caves is now an exciting archaeological site. Beyond its small opening is a huge underground grotto. Even though the cave's very large, it was certainly too dark and dusty for the travelers to live in, but it was a great place to hide things, and tremendous amounts of food supplies and artifacts have been found there. The food includes dried fish, seeds, and nuts. The artifacts include stone spear points and knives. The spear points are actually rather small. Here's a picture of some that were found. You can see their size in relation to the hands holding them. You may not know much, if anything, about Jean-Jacques Rousseau, but you have probably heard the well-known quote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains." In his early work, Rousseau argued that mankind was happiest and at its best in a state of nature, that is, before the creation of society and civilization. He saw society as artificial and corrupt, and that good people were corrupted by it. The Social Contract is perhaps the most enduring and well-known of his books, covering pretty well every aspect of man in society. However, in this book, his attitude to the condition of man in a state of nature changes. In such conditions, man is brutish and competitive by nature, and there is no law or morality. Therefore, because it is easier to survive by joining forces with others, people form societies to better fight anything that might endanger their situation. Rousseau's political philosophy has had a profound influence on later thinkers, even though, or perhaps especially because, it is open to many interpretations. But political philosophy is not everybody's cup of tea. In his own time, Rousseau was a bestseller, with novels such as The New Eloise and, especially, Emile, though even the latter is not free of his constant desire to improve society. It illustrates his ideas about the best form of education, which involves educating a child's emotions before their reason. This too had a profound influence on educational theorists. I'd recommend that you all try to get hold of English in the Southern Hemisphere by Nolan and Watts, as this provides an excellent overview of the topics that we're going to be covering in this module. It's really our primary text. It has particularly strong sections on the history of English in Australia and New Zealand, examining in some depth how the language has developed in these countries. The sections on phonology and on vocabulary will be invaluable when you're doing the written assignment, which I'm going to be telling you about in a moment once I've given you the details of a couple of other essential references. An important question about education is, then, why do some types of students achieve success easily and others struggle to do well? Well, one theory is that there is a genetic reason for academic achievement. What I mean by that is a certain innate, measurable level of intelligence. Another frequently discussed theory is environmental factors, such as the effect of home and family upbringing. A final reason is related to the teaching and learning process within educational institutions, and the way it is organized, administered, and assessed. Barred owls can be found in dense forests right across North America. They feed on small mammals, fish, birds, and small reptiles, pretty much anything that comes their way. The barred owl grows up to half a meter tall and has emerged as a very adaptable, nocturnal predator. Whereas they have been long thought to live in old-growth forests, they are now building up quite an urban population. In Charlotte, North Carolina, barred owls tend to nest in the cavities of the numerous willow oak trees that line the city's streets. Far from being endangered, the owls have expanded their range, and now, in some places, conservationists are worried about the effects they might have on other, native, species. Urban development is the first thing I wanted to talk about here in Perth. Urban development is going on at a great pace, and the standard approach here in Western Australia is for suburban development to happen at the outer edges of the city. You have suburbs slowly spreading out into areas that are cleared. And this is eating into both areas of native bushland and land that used to be used for farming, for agricultural purposes. The debate here is that on one side there's the idea that we need more housing. We have a housing shortage in Western Australia, and suburban expansion is essential. Suburban expansion on the edges of the city is cheaper and easier to do than building more homes within the city, even though it's the division of literary works into genres, or texts thought deal with a particular subject, or a subject in a particular way, makes life easier for the person browsing in a bookshop. He or she can go directly to where their favorite kind of book is shelved, be it science fiction, gothic, romance, and so on. Many writers of genre fiction are immensely popular and successful, Stephen King and J.K. Rowling to name only two. But, for the most part, such writers aren't depicting the world we live in and are writing fantasies. However, some genre writers, particularly writers of detective and police fiction, are unhappy about being categorized in this way. Genre fiction, they say, has come to be seen as inferior to what is called mainstream or literary fiction. In other words, detective fiction isn't taken seriously as literature, and yet crime novels do deal with the raw stuff of everyday life. They are, in fact, closer to the harsh reality of the modern world than most mainstream fiction. But, the critics say, while they do deal with the usual stuff of novels, character, emotion, psychology, social comment, and so on, it seldom goes very deep, and besides, most detective fiction, like certain mass-produced romantic novels, though not to anywhere near the same extent, follow a formula. This year we're planning to use a different type of assessment on this module. In the past, students were required to complete 2 long written assignments and also to do a presentation on a subject of their own choice. We have decided to ask you to write 4 shorter pieces of written coursework this year. We are also going to be more prescriptive about what you focus on in your presentation. This is because previously many students lost marks unnecessarily simply because they're called button cells, coin cells, or watch batteries. By any name, these tiny, round savior batteries pose a choking danger to small kids. And if a child succeeds in swallowing a button cell, the battery may short circuit in the moist, esophageal environment, burning the tissue. A few thousand kids wind up in emergency rooms each year, includes prolific inventor Robert Langer thinks they have a partial solution, a protective coating. The scientists covered batteries with a material technically a quantum tunneling composite in which microparticles of conductive metal are suspended in an insulating layer. Under most circumstances, including inside of a child, the layer is nonconductive. But when the material is subjected to high pressure, the microparticles are squeezed close enough together to carry a current. One such pressurized environment is a typical battery compartment in a small device. You often have to force the battery into place. So the same battery that remains inert when swallowed works just fine when it's jammed into its slot in a hearing aid. The waterproof design would also protect batteries from corrosion in high humidity. The research is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The widespread death of honeybees has some farmers fretting, 'cause if honeybees disappear, who will pollinate their crops? Almost any kind of insect you can think of. Margie Mayfield, an ecologist at the University of Queensland in Australia. Globally speaking, flies are probably the second largest group of crop pollinators. In particular, a group called hoverflies, or syrphid flies. And these are these sort of large-eyed flies that if you take a hike you sometimes see them hovering in front of your face. Along with hoverflies, the army of underappreciated pollinators includes butterflies, moths, beetles, ants, and wasps. Mayfield and her colleagues analyzed more than 36 studies on pollination, covering 17 crop plants grown on 5 continents. And they found that some of these underdog insects accounted for some 40% of the flower visits. Some of the crops in their review, especially tropical ones like mangoes and custard apples, did not rely on honeybees at all. Even commodities like canola did fine without bees. The meta-analysis is in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Mayfield says part of the difficulty in gauging the importance of bees starts with the research methods. A third of the studies they initially considered, for example, ignored everything but bees. You know, the European honeybee is obviously from Europe, so there's a lot of focus on the European honeybee there. Another issue, she says, is just raising awareness among farmers. I've encountered farmers in California and in South A. Houses were built for workers near the factories. A consensus on climate change exists among many esteemed scientists. We must act to prevent an increase in the unemployment rate. The results of the study underscore the discoveries from early detection.